I was also just going to mention there's no quiz after today's session. There's an assignment instead. And what that means is there's no Wally. So the friend that you were counting in last module, he's not going to appear in today's slides. So just in case you are looking out for him, there's no Wally, unfortunately. So just a heads up. I also mentioned at the end of last session that I was just going to show you how the City West, this treatment here looks when it's a little bit busier. I've been meaning to get a better photo, but unfortunately I can't head over to Perth. It's not too convenient for me. But anyway, this is just a snapshot of how things look in kind of those peak periods where you've got lots of pedestrians crossing over. And obviously it makes a lot of sense why you want to be slowing down cyclists and giving way to pedestrians within that area. Otherwise, it would be a bit chaotic. So just wanted to show you that photo as to how that looks in congested periods. We also had a submission from one of our participants to have a bit of a laugh at a local bollard that they ride past on their journey in a shared path. And this one looks a bit like Ned Kelly to me. I'm not really sure why it needs to have these little arms that stick out. They present certainly a snagging risk in my eyes, but thank you for sharing that. And it's going to be embedded in future courses now, as it's just a little bit of lighthearted entertainment. For those that have had a chance to review the first module's 360-degree video, you would have noticed there were two examples that was put forward to the participants, to everyone that was watching, of shared paths crossing a road. So an example number one is this one on the left-hand side, example number two, this guy over here, and both of them cross over the road. They both have different infrastructure in place that kind of facilitates this movement. And both of them have a different perception of safety as well as actual level of safety associated with crossing that particular road. So Ken, if you're able to, do you mind launching the first poll for today? And we'll just get some quick feedback of how participants found cycling across these two different examples.
Thanks, Max. So that should be popping up. Which
Okay.
example shows best practice design for a shared path crossing a road? And hopefully everybody managed to get the 360 working, the ability to look around. Be interested in any feedback if people managed to put it on and actually felt like they were on the bike, or whether people had to resort to the desktop version because they couldn't quite get the movement of the phone to activate.
It always makes me motion sick, so I'm not the one for the goggle type. I much prefer just scrolling around on my desktop, but each to their own.
Yes, or writing it actually live, eh?
That's my first preference, that's for sure.
The top of the list. All right, lots of answers have come in there. Max, we've done very well. Let's share the results here. Now, most people are going for example one there on your screen. A couple of people may be preferring two. I'm going to stop sharing that and let you have a chat about it, Max.
Thanks, Ken. So I would tend to agree. Example one there is what I'd consider best practice. A few reasons for that. We've got this continuity. So basically, the raised platform sits right where the cyclists are crossing, which means vehicles are actually slowing down where that conflict point exists. So that's pedestrians and cyclists crossing at this point. In this second example, we've got this shared path end sign. So theoretically, cyclists should be dismounting or using this hold rail to stop and give way to vehicles that are kind of within this area here. And so they don't have the priority crossing over this intersection. So yes, I would tend to agree that the example number one shows best practice in that cyclists and pedestrians are getting priority. They get to ride straight through. They've got a nice continuous facility and vehicles have to stop and give way to them. In the second example, it's the other way around. Peds and cyclists, they need to pause and stop their journey and give way to vehicles. Another strange thing about this example too is, for those that did watch the footage, it doesn't really feel like a shared path, to be honest. It's kind of like a narrow footpath. This is a local one near my house. There's lots of driveway interactions, but there's not a lot of a feeling that this is a shared path and cyclists should be, you know, cycling within this space. It's narrow, it's quite confined. There's lots of sightline issues and the like, and vegetation overgrowing. So all in all, the shared path is not a fantastic facility, and it's better than nothing. But yeah, just wanted to show those two different examples of ways of treating shared paths crossing roads, and trying to get more of this type of infrastructure out there. It makes a big difference when you're out there cycling. And if you're getting road after road after road, and you're, you know, theoretically meant to be stopping and dismounting to get off your bike to cross the road, yeah, just providing these facilities makes such a big difference. Anyway, enough about that. We'll hop into today's agenda. We've got a lot to get through. There's a lot of content. I've provided lots of examples. I tend to find learning best by examples rather than just slabs of text. So try to make it as relevant as possible and give you actual examples so you can see how that infrastructure actually plays out in the real world. We'll be discussing protected bicycle lanes, which are generally, would be considered the highest form of on-road facility, because they're physically shielded from general traffic. We'll have a look as to see what that means. There's a few different options you can go there. You can do one-way paths, two-way paths. It's also a range of separators that you can use. Sometimes we get stuck in this idea that there's only the Copenhagen lane design guidance, and that's it. If you can't do that, you can't do anything. Well, there's a few more options out there for you. So I just wanted to touch on different treatments that you can look at within the protected bicycle lane space. We'll also look at on-road bicycle lanes and some other treatments. Obviously, the significant risk here is for dooring. We'll have a bit of a chat about that. We'll look at some pavement markings and how they can be used to increase the buffer zone between parked vehicles and cyclists, as well as general traffic and cyclists, and talk about things like exclusive bike lanes and wide curbside bike lanes. I'm not going to go into too much detail about these last couple, because not really considered best practice, particularly in high-speed environments. We want to be providing separation, providing protection for cyclists. We'll also hop into the last part of today's agenda, mixing the traffic. So in other words, areas where cyclists can claim the traffic lane and they can ride just where the vehicles will drive as well. Obviously, most appropriate in low speed environments where there's lots of local area traffic management to ensure that operating speeds are kept low. So there's no chance of, you know, risky behaviors or hooning or anything like that. We want to make sure that operating speeds are down. But without further ado, we'll get stuck into it. So here is an example of a protected bicycle lane. This one is a very good one, in my opinion. This is in Melbourne. It runs kind of north-south right into the CBD. The reason I like this one so much is just the width of this facility. You're enabling this cyclists to ride two abreast. So in other words, they can ride side by side. And that's not always taken into account when you are looking at design standards or design guidance. Sometimes we just opt for the minimum standards, which would mean it's basically enough room for that cyclist envelope for them alone. And take this particular route in particular. If you were riding into work and you were stuck behind, you know, perhaps a cyclist, a slow cyclist, or a cargo bike, or, you know, a parent who's towing their child in the back in a little trailer, they would be going at slow speeds. And if you're providing very small widths, because you've got this curb here and a curb here, there is a limited corridor there. And so you're basically saying there's no opportunity to undertake overtaking maneuvers, which can lead to cyclist frustration, or it could lead to cyclists, you know, undertaking risky behaviors, or potentially cyclists just using the road instead because they don't want to have to get stuck behind slower moving cyclists. So in this example, you're kind of getting rid of that risk altogether because you provided a wide enough facility whereby you can safely overtake and you can ride at the speed that you feel comfortable in. So really good example. For those that aren't familiar with the protected bicycle lane term, I do have a few more cross sections which will show that in a bit more detail, but the general principle is the parking lane and the bicycle lane has been flipped. So traditionally, you would have the bicycle lane sitting adjacent the parking lane and the parking lane adjacent the gutter. So the gutter would be obviously here, then you'd have the car park, and then you'd have your bike lane. That's traditionally how these bicycle lanes are constructed, with protected bicycle lanes. Instead, we push the parking lane out, we build these separator islands, and that provides a separation between general traffic and the parking lane and the cycling traffic. But I've got a few more slides that will clarify that if you haven't heard that term before. So just to start off, well, what's the point of all this? Why are we looking at even building these protected bicycle lanes? If we have to move cars and park lanes, we all know that's going to be perhaps troublesome with the community. They may not understand, but there is a reason for it. We just have a look at this quick snip, and this is just one example of a survey, but 83% of the population, and this isn't just cyclists, this is population, feel more confident to ride in a space that looks like this, that is separated from general traffic and separated from the parking lane as well. Compare that to just a traditional parking lane arrangement is only 22%. So when we look at providing for cycling facilities and we're looking to target audiences ages 8 to 80, you can see that this protected lane is much more applicable to that group. You're going to get a much wider target audience compared to just traditional painted lanes, which is basically those that feel comfortable riding or have some degree of confidence cycling. Another aspect to it, just hopping back to that 8 to 80 kind of philosophy, if for those that are parents or have young nieces or nephews, would you feel comfortable sending them off to school on a facility like this? You're young, teenager, or younger than that, would you feel comfortable sending them next to the general traffic lane and next to parked cars where the doors can open? Or would you prefer to see them on a facility like this where they are fully protected? So it makes a lot of sense why the protected lanes do get such a good safety messaging across, because they are fully protected from doors swinging open, they're protected from the adjacent traffic lane, and it's just a much more comfortable rider experience if you are providing protected lanes. Here's the cross section I was referring to. For those that haven't seen these before, which just might help you imagine what these look like. But there are a couple different ways that these are typically designed. This is what is referred to as a one-way path, as the name suggests. You've got one way of cycling traffic traveling on one side of the carriageway, one way of cycling traffic traveling on the other side of the carriageway. You'll note that the separator island here, sometimes it's called a safety island, that has a width of about 1 metre. I'll get into a bit more detail as to the width of that in a second, but just take a note of that for now. And sometimes you'll also note that these separators, where there's no parked vehicle, they get a little bit narrower. And I might just chuck that in the chat right now, actually. If anyone has any suggestions, why would it be the case that if there's no parking, if this isn't a parking lane, that's just a general traffic lane, why do you think I can make this separator island narrower? And Ken, if you could let me know if we've got any answers for that one.
Lots of answers. Door opening width, no. Dooring risk. Doors not an issue. Doors. Got selling doors. Yeah. So
we'll give them the first one who mentioned doors, Ken, we'll give them a prize. Let's get it started.
Okay.
And that's completely true. So you may have noticed out in the network, or you may not have never noticed at all, which is also fine. But yes, generally there's a fairly wide separator islands within areas where there's parked vehicles to account for a swinging door. Where there is not parked vehicles, however, that separator width actually narrows quite considerably. It can get as low as 300 mil, so a ruler's length. So not a lot of space, but that's up for interpretation. If you want to provide wider facilities throughout, that's also a fantastic outcome for cyclists. Just a matter of how much carriageway width you do have available, but Glad to hear we've got Doring already at the forefront of this conversation, Ken.
Yeah, and I'm going to give Alex and Tim a prize. They're both on it and at the same time.
Fabulous. And any questions that I should pause and wait, Ken, or?
No, sorry, keep going, Max.
Superb. So here's a real life example of this protected bicycle lane. This is one way. You can see the pedestrians here using this as a little bit of a crossing as well, but that's not the end of the world. Not going to focus too much on that. What I will focus on in this image, though, is you'll see there's these little gaps within the separator island there, and that is to account for drainage. So if you could imagine the traditional, or the way that we tend to build roads, is with a crown in the middle. That is obviously a very exaggerated carriageway, but the way that we design this is that the drainage, all the water runs off and then into the adjacent gutters and channels. If you were to provide a fully curbed facility all the way along, what you'd have is water pooling all in this area here. And that's my out of control sketch gone crazy, but just to show you what that would look like. It just means all the water would pool there and you'd have issues with parked vehicles not being able to access their parks or potentially flooding the entire carriageway. So that's why these gaps are traditionally provided at certain spaces to ensure that water can still funnel through across the bike path and access your existing drainage channels. So that's another real positive about these protected bicycle lanes. You don't need to bring out the curb and channel and shift all your drainage across. You can instead opt for this kind of proposal where you just allow for gaps in the separator islands, and that will ensure that drainage accumulating is not going to be such a significant risk. Okay. Sorry, Ken?
Yeah, just a question on that. Just, no, sorry, back to the cross section. It's a good one.
Bidirectional.
Just questioning around the exact proportions there. Why not providing a little bit more space to the bikes? Oh, sorry, it was on the other one, but this one, works as well. The other cross section, yeah. 2 meters and 800 for the gap. I mean, what is a door's size, Max? How far does it extend?
So a door can extend on average about 1.2 meters. So if you can provide 1.2 meters, that's generally taken as best practice. This slide was purely put together just to ensure you can imagine what these scenarios kind of look like, and the figures weren't there suggesting this is a best practice cross section. But yes, a door can swing as far as 1.2 meters wide. So if you can, this one would creep out a little bit into the bike lane, and if you can avoid that, that would be certainly advantageous.
Yeah, and I suppose from the rider perspective, if the door encroaches significantly into that, you're kind of trapped. You're more trapped. When the door, and certainly I've had my fair share of near dooring incidents, and when you've got to quickly avoid, you go quite out into the traffic lane. You don't have that option when you're trapped in a Copenhagen. So just something else to be aware of. Thanks, Max.
No problem. So I'll hop into a bi-directional lane. So the first we saw was one way each way. This one has both directions of cycling traffic on one side of the carriageway. And you as designers get to pick which side of the carriageway you want. You certainly want to ensure that the side of the carriageway you pick is where cyclists want to travel to and from. So what I mean by that is, if on this side of the carriageway is all the kind of major activity points, all your cafes, the library, the train station, etc. If everything important is over on that side of the road, and maybe this side of the road is just residential or undeveloped land, these bidirectional facilities are a big tick, because they basically are ensuring that all the demands and all the cyclists where they want to get to is over on one side, and they don't need to cross this road. They don't need to interact with the traffic whatsoever. So it's a really good example of what you can do within these specific locations. Appreciate not all carriageways would look like that. You will often have, entertainment or activity centres on both sides of the carriageway, and that's where you may look to implement the previous slide that I showed. I know that Sydney and Brisbane in particular, they tend to use these quite frequently. In Melbourne, we've got a few, but I wouldn't say they're quite, they're rolled out in large numbers or anything like that. When we do protected lanes, they tend to be one way each way. So just something to consider. And I've got a slide later on that discusses the benefits of each of these. But here's what one looks like. And you can see this is where a separator width is not that 1 meter or that 1.2 meter that was shown, because this is not a parking lane. This is a general traffic lane. And if there's no risk for the door to open up and swing into the bike lane, then you can provide a narrower separating facility. As I said before, though, if you can provide a wider one, that's fantastic. But in these instances, this is where you could look at reducing that width. Okay, so this is a little table here that kind of demonstrates the pros and cons of each of those options. So single lane, one-way bicycle lane, and bidirectional two-way. So both of the examples provide physical separation between general traffic and cyclists. Only the one-way option provides the protection between cyclists in opposing directions, because where you've got the bidirectional facilities, it is possible to collide with the cyclist head-on. Particularly if you've got bicycles really, really wide handlebars, they could be clipped by an oncoming cyclist, and then you actually have a head-on risk. So that one is a slight risk that you need to consider if you're doing bidirectional facilities. Both of them certainly reduce the risk of dooring. We've mentioned this one, that the single lane doesn't maximize the use of the existing carriageway. And the reason for that is if you've got the protected lane on both sides of the carriageway, that means you've got two separator islands, which is say 1.2 meters each. If you're doing bidirectional, you've only got one separator island, 1.2 meters. So you're not making the most of the carriageway. And that's just a high level remark. It's not to say that you can't apply one or the other. It's just something to make a note of. Cycling facilities are present on both sides of the carriageway, meaning they can get to both sides of the road. That's applicable to the one way. These next few points, I've actually got slides to discuss them because they can be a little bit confusing to grasp. So I might just hop into the next slides just to say why the bidirectional facilities don't quite meet the same level of safety as a one-way facility would. So let's have a look here. This is an example of a vehicle exiting his driveway, and this is a one-way road like this. Intuitively, when we are exiting our driveways, if we were this vehicle, we would be looking at oncoming traffic focused in this direction here. Meaning if there's a cyclist coming along this way, odds are the vehicle exiting will acknowledge them and hopefully brake and not enter the intersection or enter the bike lane. It's not as common to expect cyclists coming in this direction. In other words, you're not really trained to be looking left and right in these particular instances, particularly for cyclists who are smaller than cars. They're more difficult to see. They can be hidden by trees. They can be hidden by bins that are on the pavement and things like that. So for this reason, there are sightline considerations that would need to be considered if you are looking at implementing bidirectional paths where there's lots of different driveways, because all of those little risks can add up to a more significant risk over the entire alignment. Another slide here that's in a similar vein suggests how a right-turning vehicle may fail to see a cyclist within their bidirectional facility. So this right-turning vehicle that we've popped a little speech bubble over, you can see likely focusing on this kind of direction here. He's focused on this car and looking at getting a gap in traffic. He'd be looking at cyclists that are traveling within this direction up towards the city or towards the screen. Less likely to notice that circled cyclists that are yellow and riding towards us. If you could also imagine you were within that vehicle yourself, trying to turn right, to be able to spot that cyclist that's also heading towards you, traveling in the same direction, you basically have to turn your neck right round to be able to see them to determine whether or not you should be making that movement or whether you will have a conflict with them. So another example where this can be quite tricky to manage these conflict points. And if you've got lots of these openings, once again, that's should be raising a few alarm bells at what can we do to ensure that motorists are aware that they need to look for both directions of travel where they're crossing the bicycle lane. So not trying to discount this particular cross-section design detail at all. They certainly have their merits, and we've worked on plenty of examples of designs where we've actively encouraged this over the one-way cross-section. So just wanted to give you that little disclaimer. There's nothing wrong with doing this, but we just need to make sure that we've taken these into consideration and we've worked out ways to mitigate these risks. Ken.
So sorry, I was just on mute there.
Yep.
Any advice on the speed on the road when a stronger barrier would be used?
That's a pretty good question. So we do get into when you would look to protect cyclists with these features and at what speeds certain treatments are available or are appropriate later on in this presentation. But in terms of when actual barrier would be considered most appropriate, I'm not sure I've got an actual answer for that, other than I would refer to our barrier specialists, Ken and Jamie within the company, who may have more information.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a clear-cut answer, really. You factor quite a number of things into that. So yeah, it'd be a bit case by case.
Yeah.
There you go. Answered it without answering it. The other one here is, do the separators need to be so close together? Could you space them out a bit?
You could, yes. And we've got examples of some different types of separators. The risks in separating them too much is you'll get vehicles parking there. You will get double parked vehicles. And then instead of creating this area where there's no risk of dooring, you've just eliminated that. So something to be mindful of. And we've got plenty of examples of what those separators can look like coming up. So I might just hold on to that one for the moment.
Yeah, and one more from Naseeb, which was around a specific treatment in Flora Hill in the Bendigo area. And interestingly, this one, I know, Max, you've ridden it, and I haven't ridden that one yet. I've driven past it, but I haven't ridden it yet. So any comments? Did you like it?
Oh, I love the Flora Hill example. So that is a bi-directional facility, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers because I know that we do include that in one of our videos. So it is considered the best practice example. So get excited for that, those that worked on that project, because it's a bi-directional facility, and particularly what they do approaching a roundabout is very clever, very good stuff. So I'll wait for everyone to watch the video themselves and you'll get to see it yourself what Flora Hill did.
Yeah, that's right. Without spoiling it, everybody will get to ride that one virtually at least. Anyway, thanks, Max.
Okay. So here we go, separators. We've got many different products out there, and generally, as I was saying at the start, people get hung up on, if you're doing protected bicycle lanes, it needs to look something like this, a Copenhagen lane style, where you've got actual curbs and there's some infill material. And these are provided, consistently throughout the alignments. And if you don't have that, then you can't do it. There's a few more treatments out there, which I will hop into, but I just want to first discuss a few more details as to this particular treatment option. So let's have a look as to something to consider. One of them is curb profiles. Probably not something you would think about in great details, not something you think about up late at night unless you're really into your curves, but a few things to consider with curbs. For those that aren't familiar with it, you've got your barrier curves, which looks something like that, which is what this is showing here on this side and this side. And you've got semi-mountable, which looks more like that, which means it's a little bit easier to obviously mount as a cyclist and as a vehicle. So when do we propose one on either side of the facility. For barrier curbs, we like to see that on the parking side. And that means vehicles will not be tempted to mount the separated curb and park on the facility itself. And that may sound ridiculous. It happens. You watch this space. As opposed to the cycling side, we don't want to see the barrier curbs because there's so limited opportunity, or you would say there's no opportunity to be able to correct your movement. If a cyclist happened to touch it, they would fall off their bike because there's no, it's just going to be too difficult to be able to regain control. You end up falling off your bike, in other words. So for cyclist side, we like to see a semi-mountable option. For the vehicle side, we don't want to see a semi-mountable option. We want to see mountable. So this is the ideal curb configuration. And let's have a look as to what I'm talking about in real life and why this kind of matters. This was installed about 6 months ago or something like that. And we went out there and did a road safety audit on this particular project. And this is how the general traffic are treating the beautiful new cycling facility. You can already see, perhaps by eye, this is fairly narrow. Not likely to have my 1.8 meters there. And with vehicles, look at this vehicle in particular, if they are actually using the separated cycling facility as their parking lane, you've completely eliminated that beautiful safety benefit of reducing the risk of dooring, because that is certainly within the dooring zone. This is certainly still within the dooring zone. So just by that slight design detail change, if the curb profile had been a barrier curb on the parking lane side, this risk could have been mitigated. Another photo here of the vehicle making the most of it. And I dare say, and this is my own conjecture, but this could have been a protest by the local residents because they weren't too happy about this project, and maybe they decided to park on the infrastructure to show their disdain, but that's just my own theory. And this one is just to show you at night conditions what I'm talking about. So this on my left-hand side is an example of a barrier curb. If we had have installed that here, you could imagine if you were a vehicle, you don't want to have to mount that. It's going to be very uncomfortable unless you've got a four-wheel drive. You're not going to be doing that. So if we had have implemented that on the parking lane side to begin with, that risk would have been very much mitigated. In terms of going forward, rather than ripping up all this curb and replacing it with barrier curb, you could look at providing some signage, flexible bollards and the like within this space, something like this, and that would do a similar job of preventing motorists from parking in that space. Ken?
Thanks, Max. Yeah, now this one reminded me of, well, it links to a question that came in from Naomi there around bins. Where do people put their bins? And I just thought, I remember when we were out there at that one, we saw some bins out there. In fact, I'll just quickly steal the screen because I've got that right there just for a second. There we go. We can see there were bins all over the place sometimes, but a few of them landing in the areas there and people avoiding it because there were some bins. So any comments on that, Max?
Yes, and that's also a really good consideration as you're doing these projects, is thinking about waste collection services. Residents for years and years, they put their bins right in the front of their nature strip, and that's where they want to put it. And if you've blocked that, you've got to think about what you're going to do, how you're going to work with them to ensure that they still have access to a suitable facility. And in practice, what I mean by that is perhaps putting gaps in these separators and creating dedicated bin areas. Yep. And then you could do pavement marking to say, pop your bin here to make it as clear as possible. Have that community consultation so residents are aware that there are facilities in place for them to put their bin. And then you won't have issues like Ken just showed. You're up and about with these examples, Ken. You just, at the click of a fingertip, they're just ready to go. It's amazing.
Ready to go on something. Yeah, no, I think that's about it for now. I'll keep monitoring the chat and feeding things through to you when we need.
No problem. The other thing I wanted to mention within these protected bicycle lanes where you are providing the wide separator is providing for disability car parking or DDA compliant parking bays. If we were to provide continuous separator islands and block off access to curb ramps, that's obviously not going to work for people with special needs or mobility issues, or people that need to access those parks. So I've just included this figure here as a reminder. If you are providing protected bicycle lanes adjacent any DDA parking bays, you will need to see gaps within the separator facility. You will need to ensure there's a curb ramp so they can access the adjacent footpath. What I also like about this example is see how it may just be illustratively, but they've actually colored that conflict point as well. So they're saying this is where people will be crossing, and it alerts cyclists that, okay, something's changing up here. I should maybe slow down or be aware that there could be people crossing. And I think that's just another tip to take into consideration if you are working within this space. I forgot about this one. So this is an example of what not to do. So this is a worst case scenario. I'm not sure what the term is, but I'll just zoom in on this so it's a little bit clearer. We've got a tiny little zebra crossing here, and I'm all for it. I don't mind a zebra crossing across a bicycle path. It may look a little bit silly, a little bit ridiculous, but I think we do need to give pedestrians priority crossing over cyclist paths. The only issue with this one is there's no curb ramps. This is a real example. This is in Melbourne. And so what that means is pedestrians need to walk along the footpath, step down onto the bicycle path, step back up to access the bus stop. We need some curb ramps there, or better yet, we could look at raising this facility so cyclists have to slow down and then bringing it back down. So pedestrians have a nice continuous flat surface to walk across, and the actual hump in the road will ensure cyclists slow down, give way to pedestrians crossing there. So not a great example there. Ken?
Any comments on bluestone curb drains and trying to fit these sorts of facilities when you've got that?
So there is a note within the Austroads guides when it comes to this. I might just hop down to a previous slide that I can make this a bit clearer. So when we measure our cycling facilities, for those that are really into the design space, you're generally taking the invert of the curb to the edge of the curb on that side. So that would be your cycling width there. There is an Austroads guidance, I can't quite remember the exact clause, but it does suggest that if the gutter of the curb is not appropriate for transversing as a cyclist. In other words, if it's rough surface, if there's constantly litter there, leaf litter and the like, if there's a joint deformation, so perhaps there's an actual difference between the concrete gutter and the adjacent asphalt pavement, perhaps a tread of a tire could get caught in there. Don't use that as your width for the cyclist facility. Instead, take your width as the edge of the curb. So that kind of distance there. And that is what I would say applies for bluestone curbing as well. If you've assumed that you can take the rough surface of the bluestone curb and say, well, cyclists can use that as part of their facility. Cyclists won't use that as part of their facility unless you've got a mountain bike or you just happen to love riding on really rough surfaces, because it will be incredibly uncomfortable. And those bluestone curbs can easily be 300, 400 mil wide. So just an example, if you took the minimum width for these facilities and said 1.2 meters, if you've included bluestone curb and that's 400 mil, you're now looking at an actual width of 800 mil, which is basically the width of handlebars with your arms poking out. So really good question. Can we get that one a prize there as well? Sorry, I missed the name there, Ken, but that was a very good question.
Yeah, that was Douglas there. So prize.
Thank you, Douglas. Any other questions there, Ken? Or
no.
Carry on.
Sorry.
Those are the narrow type separators that I was showing before. as mentioned, most appropriate when we are not looking at any parking facilities next door. Here we've got some planter boxes. For those that know me personally, I'm a big greenie. I love seeing streets with lots of green facilities. I love seeing plants and native vegetation being brought back into our streetscape. However, I do have an issue with these facilities with regards to how is this actually being maintained? You know, is there need for any weeding or the like, or replanting of these plants, or is this leaf litter going to drop off and then really stuff up the rideability of that adjacent bicycle lane? Because I can guarantee you, if there was maintenance required, they're not going to be closing off the traffic lane to fix whatever is required. They'll be closing off the bicycle lane to get in there and do whatever they need. So that's my one kind of issue, I suppose you could say, with the planter boxes, and also the fact that they are at a low level. I've got too many drawings on here. Because of their low level, they can present as a pedal strike risk as well. So you could just snag against it on your pedal, and that could also have quite a destabilizing effect. I've got this example here. Anyone wants to tell me where this is? Hopefully the big tall building in the background might capture some people's attention. Okay, I got Sydney, I got Seattle, Auckland. Auckland is correct. Well done, Douglas. This is Federal Street in Auckland, relatively new infrastructure treatment that they've popped in here. You can see they've gone for very, very colourful. Look, sorry, it's on the wrong setting there. They've gone for very colourful planter boxes. And they've also gone these kind of circles around the intersection as like a tactical urbanism approach to bring down operating speeds. As I said, I'm not trying to discourage this kind of thinking. I love to see lots of flowers and beautiful vegetation, but I do have issues when you've got soil that's kind of already managing to drop onto the roadside. Luckily that it's not on the cycling facility at the moment, but yes, and the other aspect of these things is, will they get, struck by cyclists? Will they get struck by vehicles? And if they are they going to stay there, or are they going to then move into the bicycle lane and create that kind of conflict as well? So something to consider within the planter space. These guys here, not sure many people are quite familiar with these ones, but I'd like to give out a prize if anyone can tell me what is the name of this product. And the clue that you have is the product name is, it looks like what the animal is. So there you go, it's a hint. It is an animal.
They were quick on the answer. We have a lot of people who are going with bees and bumblebees, but interestingly, our first one to come in was armadillo.
Armadillo is correct. I do like bumblebee, there's no denying that, but for those that need a reminder of what is an armadillo, that's an armadillo, so you can see the similarities there. And I believe that they're starting to go towards a different product called a zebra now, when they use a white instead of a yellow. They're calling it a zebra instead of the armadillo. So this example here is in Perth. These are actually called zebras now. They're rebranding, Ken.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say a couple of things there. So A Pierce, so you've got the username there. I'll work out who that is. Was in there for a prize. And yeah, so we had somebody from Perth in the last session, didn't we, commenting on these ones in particular?
That's right. So they do, there is a level of separation there. If you compare that to what we were looking at before with, wide separated facilities or even raised planter boxes, this is on the lower end of the scale. I can't see this as being too obvious as a driver to actually spot these tiny little things on the edge of the ground, on the pavement, sorry. In saying that, the pros of these products is they are bolt down, which means they're very easy to install and then remove. And also they're 100% recyclable, which is also a big positive if you like me and like sustainability. So That's good. But in terms of actual delineating the bicycle space, not quite as prevalent as other options that we have.
Question
Such as, oops, sorry.
Question came in. Do those ones have lights, LEDs in them or something?
I don't believe they do. They have the retroreflective kind of facility in them though. So when you shoot your headlights at them, they bounce straight back up at you. So they do, in low light conditions, do a pretty good job, but they're not actually like electrically lit.
Thanks, Max.
These flexible bollards are certainly very popular here in Victoria at the moment. We've got this pop-up bike program. I know New South Wales have a similar thing going on, and they are, it's a flexible paddle, they're sometimes called. And what that means is if you were to strike it as a vehicle or as a cyclist, they would pop back up. So that's good. It's not a rigid fixed hazard. And just another example of that type of product as well. In this example, this used to be where this person is cycling at the moment, just another traffic lane. And they decided to give that entire space to cyclists. And it's just made such a big difference. I used to frequently ride this route, and you used to have to hop onto this bridge where you had to share the path with cyclists, and it was with pedestrians, it was super narrow, and then you had to force your way back into the traffic lane. It was terrible. So now they've got this facility here. It's such a big difference. And you may be thinking, but this isn't providing an actual, physical shield. In other words, this vehicle could still run off the road and collide with the cyclist. And yes, that is true. But in terms of a step change, this is miles above what was previously provided. So in terms of improving cycling safety, this is still certainly ticking that as a box. The last separator I've got here is these flexible bollards as well. These ones don't have that little beam at the bottom that connects them all together. Don't like these ones quite as much. And the other reason I don't like these is this is a little bit of a strange example. This is a part-time parking lane. So during peak periods, it's open up to general traffic and they can use that as a traffic lane. However, in non-peak times, people can park there for a couple hours at a time. And what that means is this width here is certainly not appropriate to cater for dooring incidents. So even by providing these flexible bollards, you haven't really eliminated the risk there, which cyclists are traditionally very concerned about, which is dooring. So this is not such a great example of cycling infrastructure. What's up next? Yes, my favorite time of day. It's what's wrong with this photo? And we can see there's a confused looking cyclist. He doesn't know what's going on here, but I'll ask everyone in the chat if you can just jot down, what do you think, what's wrong with this photo? I was asking, is Ken wrong with that photo? It's a good question.
No prizes there, no.
That's blacklisted.
I like it. While we're waiting for that, Duncan's asked about bikes on audio tactile line marking. Interestingly, we've done some work on motorcycles on audio tactile line marking, and Duncan knows that very well because he was one of the riders out there riding and testing for us. In terms of cyclists, we haven't done any of that specific testing. There has been study on the effectiveness of separation using audio tactile as it is in this photo, which was done by Cameron Munro, I think. Dig that out probably, but no, in terms of skid resistance or slipping. Lots of points there, lots of people about no separator, within dooring zones, dooring hazards, people walking in the cycling lane, no buffer.
Very good.
Just check if there's anything else.
I might give a prize out there, Ken, to the hang on, let me just go to the next slide. People walking in the bicycle lane. It's actually a skateboarder there and a scooter rider as well within the bicycle lane. And yes, there's some pretty eagle-eyed vision there for that participant to actually get that. So well done.
Yeah, that's Sam. Sam will have a prize for that. Is that your biggest issue with this
No.
facility, Max?
Not my biggest issue. In fact, the biggest issue is certainly dooring. I like it when I see that eagle-eyed vision. It gets me pretty excited. Dooring, certainly. You don't want to be riding next to that, and all you're worried about is you're sitting there on the saddle, white knuckle, just hoping no one swings open a door in front of you, because your ability to shift at the last moment is really minimized. And if you do that, are you then hopping into a live traffic lane where someone else may collect you? So certainly a very real concern for cyclists when they are cycling within those facilities. And actually, hopefully this works. I'll try and stream this and we'll see how we go. So this is a real example. We do have a near miss then. I'll click on that one again. And Ken, does that look familiar to you? Did that come through?
Yes, it did. So that must be you with a 360 on your head, or whoever I was riding with, 360 camera on the head. Yeah, and to dodge that car for sure.
That's right. Door. So that was Ken there, and we're very lucky that Ken just has the agility skills of a fine martial artist and managed to dodge around that vehicle. But you could imagine.
Play it again. See how far I go into the traffic line.
Let's have a look. No, that's right. So that was close enough. That was close enough to get collected, I reckon. The side of your body got far enough into that traffic lane where you may have been collected by a vehicle, if there was a vehicle there. So that's just a real life example. Oh, I'm playing that one again. This one is an interesting slide. And by interesting, I mean, not really sure why it was ever commissioned, this particular study, but they went through a whole bunch of different cycling dooring accidents, and they're just trying to determine which side of the car that most dooring collisions occur. And not surprisingly, it's 75% on the driver's side, because that's predominantly where a motorist will be, and also where the bicycle lane is also generally on that side of the road as well. So it makes a lot of sense that's the majority. Why we're seeing figures on this side here, though, is because if you can imagine a vehicle is approaching a signalized intersection and they're stopped, the passengers want to get out, they fling open their door, and a cyclist filtering in that space gets collected there. And I've actually been involved in a collision on this side. Nothing too serious. It was didn't fall off my bike or anything, but I did scratch their car. So I felt a little bit bad for them, but then I thought, oh, hang on, I'm not in the wrong here. You just swung your door open. So then there's also that. But yeah, certainly no significant injuries or anything like that. Included this little table here, which just can suggest what types of treatments may be appropriate depending on the road use classification. Now, fully appreciate we've moved past terms like these, and we're moving more into movement in place and link in place kind of terminology, but the general principles are the same, where if you're looking at a bicycle priority route, your treatment should not include relocating cyclists, which is fairly intuitive. But the main reason I included it in this slide, this particular table, is regardless of what your road use classification is, whether it's meant for buses or freight or it's a collector road, whatever, one-way protected lanes, two-way protected lanes, and off-road paths are always considered appropriate. And that's what I'm trying to just really sell this messaging, that these facilities just go a whole way above and beyond traditional bicycle lanes in improving safety. And that's why they're considered appropriate, because we want to get more of these protected facilities or off-road facilities out there. Okay, so here's another example of a traditional bike lane. Sorry, Ken, I might just pause there. You're on mute, sorry, Ken.
Yep, saw that, thank you. I was just trying to get in there before you started the next one, but missed the button. Couple of points have been raised here. any special rules around e-scooters, particularly for off-road paths, or we're getting a lot of different different vehicles out there, or scooting devices or riding devices. Any comment on that?
As far as I'm aware, it depends on the actual power of the motorized scooter in particular, and whether or not they should be traveling on the road, on the footpath, on the cycling facility is dependent jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But as far as I'm aware, they should be going on the footpaths because they are considered too powerful, unless they're just like a little putt-putt, or they're like a mobility scooter, which are allowed on the footpath.
Yeah, good. And looks like Vince and Duncan are having a good chat in there about motorcyclists using cycle lanes on the approach to signals. So I'll let that one continue to bubble away behind the scenes.
Fantastic. So we've got a traditional bicycle lane here, adjacent the parking lane, adjacent, well, let's have a look. We've got tram tracks, we've got general traffic, a lot going on in this particular lane here. And you may notice that there's just this random little green strip. And believe it or not, that is intentional. They didn't run out of paint. They didn't just decide not to do the entire green. The intention of this green strip, this was a trial. This was on Glenferrie Road, for those that are interested, was to get cyclists to adjust their positioning. So rather than cycle within this space, to shift over a little bit, ride closer to general traffic in the traffic lane and to the trams. And you may be thinking, well, that seems counterintuitive, but I think that really highlights the significant risk that parked vehicles really do have for cyclists. We're more concerned about pushing cyclists closer to traffic that's moving at 40 kilometers per hour than a stationary vehicle, because the stationary vehicle presents more of a risk. It's pretty mind-boggling. Once again, I'm not suggesting this is a best practice by any means. I just wanted to highlight that this is a trial that has been completed. And just to give you some initial results of what was kind of concluded or evaluated as part of this, the average motorist tracking actually did shift over about 300 mil. So in other words, this vehicle, did I get rid of my pen? Yeah, no, this vehicle, he shifted over about 300 mil to give cyclists more space. So that's a pretty good outcome just from that green strip. And also cyclists, they moved over, trying to get the stats there. Yeah, about the same as well. It was about 150 mil, a little bit less. They shifted over within that space as well. And some more qualitative data suggested that 75% of cyclists felt more comfortable within this arrangement, 75%. I don't see that as the answer to our drawing problems, but that is something that has been installed. This one's actually in Hastings in New Zealand, and similar kind of philosophy. Instead of painting the entire bicycle lane green, they've just opted for these little stripes that are dotted along. They're not intended, as is shown in this photo, that cyclists need to cycle on the stripes. They're just meant to be a constant reminder to motorists traveling in the traffic lane and also in the parking lane that cyclists are within this area. Haven't seen the evaluation just yet on this particular trial, but just something else that's currently out there. Once again, I will just add the disclaimer, not suggesting this is your best case scenario for cycling infrastructure. Just a couple examples of what's being trialed. Let's have a look at some pavement marking options. So this is what we'd call the double chevron. So chevron line marking on the traffic lane side and chevron line marking on the parking lane side as well. This gives you a fairly significant buffer on both sides. So if you're concerned about both sides of the those conflict points, then this is a really good option for cyclists. And I've just provided this, if you are within this particular environment, some dimensions there that you can work with. But this resource at the bottom here, they provide some excellent guidance there that you can also tap into. So for those that are interested in the actual design specs, feel free to flick through that one. Here we have single chevron adjacent the parking lane. So in other words, if you can't fit in both, here's an example of one where you're putting the chevron adjacent the parking lane, and this is my traffic lane here, and there's nothing to protect me from oncoming traffic. Interestingly, the way that most jurisdictions justify going for this treatment as opposed to having a single on the other side is whether or not there is a high turnover in parking. In other words, if you've got that door opening more frequently, so if there's a timed restriction and there's lots of vehicles turning over, the doors are constantly opening, that's when you provide the buffer on that side. Okay. Once again, there's some design spec there for you if you're interested. Here's one from Christchurch, and this is where the buffer is provided on the other side. So you can see my parking lane is over there. This is the through traffic lane, and the chevron pavement marking is on the traffic lane side. And this, as opposed to what I discussed earlier, is when you'd have longer periods of parking, therefore less turnover, less doors opening. Theoretically, that's how these guidance are meant to be interpreted. In practice, it seems to be a little bit of a mix and match. It just seems to be whatever the designer felt like that particular day. I'm not seeing a lot of consistency into how those are actually applied, whether it's one side or the other or both, but that's what the guidance currently states. And yeah, from an anecdotal personal point of view, I'm always much more cognizant of opening car doors than I am of a vehicle from behind me. The reason being, someone in their car door flicks open their car. I'm not in their line of sight. I am hiding behind them, basically. And it's very uncommon for them to do the Dutch reach, to use the opposing hands and to actually face me where I am in the bicycle lane. Therefore, that risk of a door swinging open, anecdotally, is higher than a vehicle that is traveling in the same direction as you and is likely to have spotted you and know that you're in the bicycle lane. And there may be, certain situations where if you're going around a bend and they can't see you at all, then perhaps that's where you'd be at higher risk from the general traffic lane. But just as a general rule of thumb, I tend to be a lot more nervous for parked vehicles than vehicles coming from behind. That's just some more details there. An exclusive bike lane, we do still see these on our network, and unfortunately they do tend to be in high speed environments. I'm a little bit would like to challenge these particular treatments, because I suppose if you've already said you've dedicated a cycling facility and you've allowed for the width of a cycling facility, can we not go one further and then actually protect the cyclists within that facility as well? I suppose we've just at some stage said that, well, a painted line should be enough for cyclists. It's not really enough. We need to ensure that cyclists feel comfortable riding there and they're safe riding there. And should anything happen, there is a degree of separation between general traffic and the cycling community. Which leads me on to the next one, which is wide curbside bike lanes, which is not at all what I'd consider best practice. It's at the far end of the scale. And sometimes you just see these kind of ... There's a cyclist potentially here. I really don't think that they offer much protection at all for cyclists, particularly when you're looking at in high-speed environments. Sometimes you see these in 70 kilometre, 80 kilometre per hour speed zones, which is just nuts. We need to be getting cyclists off-road in those instances, and basically saying cyclists should be fully protected in these areas, and not looking to implement any more of these. I might just pause there before I hop into the last topic there, Ken, and just check in to see if we have any extra questions.
Nothing that you need to deal with there, Max. A bit of discussion going on, but people nicely commenting on different things they see, which is good.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ken. So we'll talk about mixing traffic now, and what that means is cyclists sharing the traffic lane with general traffic, which may sound crazy, but it can work, and it's not always about protection and fully separating the two road users. There are times where you can bring them together and let them share the space. This is not a good example of that, mind you. This is actually, it's a little bit of an in-between. It's difficult to see in the distance there, but there is that example of the ... and the bicycle symbol there. I'm not going to draw that because I'll stuff it up, but so it's kind of an in-between of you're meant to share the bike lane, but there's also no room for you to share. And really not a good example. But anyway, let's have a look at where this may be appropriate. Here's a nice little graph if you are ever contemplating different types of infrastructure and what may be appropriate. Where we're looking at less than 40 kilometers per hour, that's when lane sharing the traffic lane may be appropriate. We should also note that this is operating speed. So this is not just the posted speed limit, as we'll all be aware, just because there's a number with a red annulus around it, that doesn't mean that's what the general traffic are traveling at. So we are looking at operating speeds when we're discussing these particular treatments. Where we're looking between the 40 and 60 mark, let's get some separated bicycle lanes or protected bicycle lanes and shifting parking over as well. Greater than 60 kilometer per hour, cyclists, let's get them off-road. So that's quite a significant shift from a lot of the existing cycling network that's out there, where I'm sure if you happen to drive home on busy arterials at speeds greater than 60 or 70, you may see a bicycle lane on road. That doesn't really align very well with this particular graph, and certainly does not align very well with the general safety of cyclists. So we've shifted away from that kind of thinking. This little guy is called a sharrow. For those that are not familiar with the term, it's a bicycle symbol, couple arrows on the top there. And what it's meant to communicate, for those that are not familiar with it, is that cyclists, you can now claim the traffic lane. So cyclists and general traffic, you now share this environment. So it's no longer, there's the bicycle lane, there's the general traffic lane, merge into one, enjoy your life together. That's the general philosophy. And you certainly don't want to be installing these in areas where you have high operating speeds, because a cyclist may be traveling relatively low compared to a vehicle, and that change in speed can be very frustrating for a vehicle that is waiting behind a cyclist. So you could create lots of issues with driver frustration. And obviously, if there were in high speed environments, the severity of crashes would be very significant. So that is something to consider. Just while I do talk about the severity of crashes, I might just hop into what we would consider a safe system speed for a cycling crash. So for those that are not familiar with the term, we have these S-type curves, which kind of look something like this. And there's basically a point, and I'll label the axis here, where this is the probability of a fatality occurring on the y-axis. And this is our speed. My thing is in the way, so I can't finish that. This is our speed over here. And as you can see, as speed increases, the probability of fatality increases, which makes sense. If you get struck at higher speeds, the likelihood of that being a fatal accident increases. Where things start to get really, really bad, really, really quickly is at this point here. And this is taken at 10%. And this speed is 30 kilometers per hour. I could have done that as a little question to the group, but I'm running out of time, so I thought I'll just fill that one in. So that is generally taken as the safe system speed for cyclists. So in other words, if you've got a cyclist and they can potentially collide with general traffic, you want to ensure that whatever infrastructure is in place, that collision speed is at 30 kilometers per hour or less. So you can see before when I was saying if you've got 70 or 80 kilometers per hour speed limits, or speed zone, sorry, and operating speeds up at that high limit, and you've got an on-road bicycle facility, that's nowhere near that 30 kilometer zone, is it? Nowhere near it. So you really want to ensure, if you are providing mixed traffic and you're promoting sharrows, in other words, sharing the lane, let's try and get that operating speed down to 30 kilometers per hour or less. Here's an example. Oh, sorry, Ken. I'll stop for a question.
That's all right. No, it's just around, you're talking sort of vehicle speed there. What about bike speed? Are you taking that into consideration? So e-bikes, people on racing bikes and things like that?
As you can imagine, when you were just looking at the physics of these particular crashes, the heavy mass object has a lot more force behind it than the light mass. Very little protection in a cyclist. maybe a helmet on, but that's about it. So in terms of the actual speed of the collision, we are focused on the worst case scenario, which is your heavy vehicle, that colliding into the cyclist at 30 kilometers per hour.
Thanks.
Here we have an example of a sharrow in place. This is like a local street network in Melbourne. They decided to do this entire grid network at 30 kilometers per hour. So it is a new limit. And just wanted to show this is how the sharrows can look. There's no protected cycling facilities here. Cyclists do just ride in the middle of the road and basically treated like a car with this environment. And all the vehicles behind them that are just waiting behind a slow cyclist, I suppose they just have to wait. But that's just that's this type of road environment that they're creating, and it does work quite well as long as there's appropriate local area traffic management treatments in place. And what do I mean by that? Is like, as long as vehicles cannot actually reach higher operating speeds, because there's other infrastructure treatments there in place that ensure that operating speeds are low. So they're not going to want to, try and hoon down there at 50, 60 kilometers per hour, because there's plenty of speed humps and chicanes and other treatments to really slow down general traffic.
Now, a couple of tricky questions coming in. A bit of commentary around when sharrows are used. Are they used in other states, or where they're used? Are they used in other states or Victoria? I think Duncan says they're used a very little bit in New South Wales. And then Tim's asking now, from a road rules perspective, are they a regulatory device, or are they just sort of an informative shared area?
Okay, I don't believe they're regulatory. I think they are purely like a warning device. So they don't actually hold any regulatory powers or the like. And in terms of if they're used in other jurisdictions, yep, certainly seen them in New South Wales and Queensland. And I believe I've seen them in WA as well. So we're certainly getting them out there. I'm trying to think of SA. I think SA as well. So I think that they are there, but perhaps not as widespread as we see them in Victoria.
And sharrow is the same as BAS zones. What's BAS? Bicycle activity.
Yes, it's a similar design philosophy. That's what they use, I believe, in the States. Similar philosophy. You want to keep, they're basically local streets, low speeds, put the cyclists in the middle of them and let them just travel within the traffic lane. So yes, similar philosophy, different terminology.
Great, thanks.
This one is in a rural Victorian town. So it's not just our metropolitan centres that are seeing this type of treatment, but we're also seeing 30s out in rural Victoria, as well as the sharrows in the middle of the traffic lane. So that might communicate a little bit better what I'm trying to say here, where cyclists just claim the traffic lane. They are part of the traffic now, as opposed to having a separated facility. With my local area traffic management, this is an example of something that I love to see. This one is in Adelaide, and this is a one-way slow treatment. In other words, only one vehicle at a time can cross at this particular location. However, what we do have here is little bypasses. So cyclists get a nice free run. They don't have to worry about slowing and stopping for the speed hump. They get a nice connected continuous journey. And I can just see at the end of that speed hump there is a sharrow. So that is certainly South Australia are implementing those. Another example of this in New Zealand, this one's in Christchurch. This one is similar philosophy. Cyclists don't need to travel and cross the actual speed hump and slow down. They get a little bypass. This one's a little bit more frustrating, as there's a bit of a deflection there, which may slow down cyclists anyway. If you could perhaps get rid of that little random island there. Maybe that's a deliberate intention to stop parking there, though. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, if there's opportunity to stop, to make those continuous journeys for cyclists, that's really good. I was also just going to mention, for those with a fine eye, you might have noticed that the sign there has been coloured in. It's actually been graffitied, and yes, an elderly woman on that street actually got arrested for vandalising all the signs in her street because she was very upset with this cycling infrastructure installed. So there's also a link to the news article there if you're interested in reading that, because there's certainly not everyone is as positive about cycling infrastructure as everyone in this course. Okay, a couple more local area traffic management solutions or things to think about. This one's a little bit difficult to see on the ground, so I'm just going to hop up to an aerial view here, which may make a little bit more sense. So it's kind of like a half road closure. Half of the road is closed to general traffic, but cyclists get to travel through. So let's just go, if this line here represents how a vehicle would travel through this particular road network, if they were heading south, and a cyclist get to travel straight through. So you can see the continuity for cyclists is much, much better. They don't have to worry about doing that little detour. However, in opting for this particular treatment, what you've actually created is two conflict points that otherwise would not have existed. So not a great outcome really, because you've now got vehicles crossing over cyclist paths twice as much, which is not fantastic because vehicles are already perhaps a bit annoyed that they have to do this detour and may not see the cyclists, etc. Anyway, won't spend too much time on that one. We'll have a look at a better example of how this can potentially work with more of a full road closure. And let's have a look at this. So here's our cycle lane. That's not going to work. Sorry, let me just get my pen up. Here's my cycle lane, travels straight through. And my vehicle lane, they get turned around. They don't interact with the cyclist whatsoever. That's the cycle lane there, traveling straight through as well. That's the same road. That's just in two different sections of this particular network. Two different ideas that they've come to propose or to implement as part of this treatment. One kind of creates twice the amount of conflict point, and one is a much better example of providing for cycling safety as the paramount. That's your priority within this space, and general traffic a little bit below. And because this is a local road network, and before this was done, this was used as a rat run, I think this is an awesome outcome. It's getting more people on their bike. They feel safer to ride within this environment because there's not much traffic. It's only the residents that live on this street basically that drive up and down here, because who wants to do these U-turns to get where they need to go? So yeah, just something else to consider if you can provide these type of facilities. And there's heaps of them out there on the bicycle network, and they're just a big win for cyclists. That is the end of today's session, and we have covered quite a lot, but I did want to spend a little bit of extra time just going through the assignments. Ken, I'll just touch base with you to see if we had any questions.
No, everything's pretty good. So yeah, ready for you to jump in there if you're going to jump into Moodle, and we're going to no Wallies today. Was just a reminder there because there's no quiz. We've got an assignment, and there is a video. There is a video as well, isn't there, for people to watch on some protected lanes and the like?
That's right. So the protected lane that I showed at the start, you'll get to experience that firsthand, how that feels cycling within that beautiful wide facility where you saw two cyclists riding side by side. You'll get to get a taste of what that feels like. But just thought this one was funny. Don't be putting a cycle fence there right at the end of a cycling facility. And also, I wanted to mention this guy. He regularly cycles up and down the arterial road close to our office, and he's just an icon. He's doesn't really care about everyone else bipping and honking at him and taking photos. He's just a man on a mission, riding his penny farthing. We don't see enough penny farthings, in my opinion. I'll share my screen again, and I'll go through the assignment now. Now I've gone through the presentation, so let me just pop it up on screen number 1. And can you just confirm that's come through, Ken?
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay.
Hang on. Oh, yeah.
And I'll open up this part as well. And I should just get started with how it actually looks in Moodle. So apologies for this. I just need to log back into Moodle. It kicked me out because I was uneventful. Here we go. So this is what Moodle looks like for those that haven't seen it. I've already seen a lot of the quiz results come through, and it's good to see we're getting lots of 8, 9s and 10s. So thank you very much for those that have already completed it. For those that haven't, time to get stuck in. As Ken mentioned, there's no quiz after today. We do have an assignment though. So as well as the assignment, we'd like everyone to review the 360-degree footage. So that's just clicking on that link there. And if you have the goggles all set up, put your phone in there and you can get that cycling experience. It's about a 5-6 minute video, and we'll get you to watch that before our next session. And for module 2, you'll see that there's 2 documents within this particular folder. One's a Word document, one's a PDF. And if you open up both of them, I'll open up the PDF first so you can have a look. We have got an actual cycling project designed for you to review. And we don't need to review every single detail, so don't be stressed if you've never seen an actual cycling design or any design before. We're not trying to make sure that you pick up on every single idiosyncrasy of this particular design. However, we do have some questions that we've deliberately set up to get you to think about the cycling infrastructure that's out there, what's proposed, what could be improved, okay? Big disclaimer there in the red text. This design has been provided for training purposes. Please don't distribute it or don't send it to your local MP or bring it out for community consultation, because it will be very unfortunate for everyone. But it's certainly just meant for this training course. So please keep that in mind. This is York Street in Launceston. And here we've got a design. For those that are not familiar with the road network in particular, there's also a Google Street View, which is in the Word document, so you can kind of run up and down it and just get a feel for what the road environment looks like. But there is a legend here which kind of entails all the different treatments that are proposed. So they've got some raised intersection proposed. There's a few relocated loading bays and just some other features with this. So we'll get you to review each of those plans. So there's 4 sheets within this particular design. You can print it out or just do it on your laptop. We don't want you to spend too much time within this particular assignment, but that's your first step, review all of this. And in the Word document that I alluded to before, our steps are placed at the start of the document. Download and review the Module 2 design review file, which we just opened. Review the existing conditions using Google Street View. If you click on that link there, it'll take you straight to York Street in Launceston. Drive up and down, have a look and see how it currently operates, just to give you a taste of what the environment feels like. Fill out the table provided below and save and upload this document to Moodle. So you can just save it to your local hard drive or a memory stick or anything like that. And I'll show you how to upload it as well, just so it's all clear from start to finish the point of this assignment. So highlighted section there, just pop in your name. Our first question is, how does the existing environment cater for cyclists? In other words, what is the current cycling infrastructure out there? Is there any? If you can just jot down in dot points, if you want to do some snips, if you want to write a paragraph, that's fine. We don't need anything too detailed. This assignment shouldn't be taking you longer than 15, 20 minutes. It's not meant to be a detailed review. We just want to ensure that these kind of fundamental questions have been understood from participants. And yes, you're picking up, I suppose, the main concerns for cyclists. Question number 2 is, how does the design cater for cyclists? So that would be reviewing the actual plan, seeing how things are changing from existing conditions to that proposed design, what's being proposed that improves the safety for cyclists or changes things for cyclists. The final question, what treatments / changes in the design could you recommend to improve the safety for cyclists? And we've just limited to that to name 3. I'm sure if you went through all the slides today, you could pick out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but we don't need to see a whole gamut of different treatment solutions. We just want you to think about what could actually feasibly work within that road environment that could improve safety for cyclists. And maybe you've already thought of one, which would be, let's just build a massive overpass and get cyclists well and truly away from the road environment. Let's try and be a little bit, I suppose, work within general constraints. Pretend like you're actually proposing this as part of your state government, local government, or if you're a consultant working on their behalf. So let's try and keep things, within the realms of possibility. just so we get some answers that I suppose could feasibly be installed. Once you've completed that, as I mentioned, you can just save that as a Word document. You can PDF it as well if you really want it, but you go back to Moodle, and I'm in the teacher's version of this, so it will say a slightly different thing for you. At the bottom of this, it will say add submission, and that's where you can actually add the file, and we'll get a notification saying that you have added your submission. And that means we can get in there, we can grade it, we can provide you some feedback and any other tips to ensure that you're getting that minimum requirement of 80% to pass the course. I think I've covered everything there, Ken. Is there anything else that you'd like me to touch on?
No, you've done very well, Max. Yeah, have a go at that assignment, everybody. Yeah, watch that video. Let's get a little bit of writing, a little bit more discussion from Max and myself. Question on when's it due there, Max?
Good question. We've done it due the start of next week, so Monday next week, and that's just so prior to our next session on Tuesday, got a little bit of insight as to how everyone is looking at these particular environments, and we can maybe have a chat through of any kind of common themes or issues that we're seeing. Yeah,
and we really don't want you spending many hours on this. It is a quick look at it and dot pointing a few things down, as Max has said. Awesome.
Fabulous. Thanks everyone for your time. There's a couple of minutes left over to either complete the quiz or hop into the virtual reality world and enjoy cycling in the real world.
Yeah, the quiz from last week.
Quiz from last week.
Sorry, from the last module. There's no quiz for this one. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone.